Packing her tools, she felt a sense of accomplishment and anticipation. The work was far from finished, but it was evolving beautifully. She thought about the next steps, the adjustments to make, and the opportunities to further enhance the composition. The journey was ongoing, and she was fully committed to seeing it through. Each day, each challenge, and each discovery was part of the process that would transform the task from ordinary to extraordinary. Walking home, she reflected on the lessons of the day. She thought about how easily people underestimate what seems simple, how rushing leads to mediocrity, and how patience and attention reveal true potential. She felt a quiet pride in her approach, knowing that her dedication and focus were shaping something meaningful. The masterpiece was emerging layer by layer, shaped by her care, persistence, and understanding. She was ready for the next day, eager to continue, determined to see the journey through to its fullest expression. That night, as she prepared for sleep, she reviewed the day in her mind. She thought about the challenges she had faced, the adjustments she had made, and the insights she had gained. Each step, each correction, and each experiment had brought her closer to the goal. She felt a sense of calm and anticipation, knowing that her dedication would continue to bear fruit. The task that others had considered easy had revealed its hidden complexity, and she had embraced it fully. She was ready for tomorrow, ready to continue, ready to see the masterpiece take shape. The final day arrived with a quiet anticipation. She entered the studio early, carrying her tools with care and setting them in their usual places. The room was filled with the usual sounds of activity, people moving quickly, talking, laughing, but she was focused on one thing, completing the work she had nurtured for days. The task that everyone else had dismissed as easy had become a personal challenge, a project that demanded patience, attention, and creativity. She felt a sense of calm excitement as she began the last phase, knowing that every detail, every correction, and every subtle improvement she had made would come together in the end. She started by reviewing all the progress she had made. Every note in her notebook, every adjustment she had recorded, and every experiment she had conducted was carefully considered. She traced over lines, examined proportions, and checked alignment. The work had grown into something that had depth, harmony, and subtle complexity. What had once seemed simple had revealed its hidden layers, and she was determined to honor them fully. She worked slowly, carefully, making small refinements that would make a significant difference in the final result. As she continued, she encountered one last set of challenges. Some sections were still not perfect, requiring delicate adjustments and precise corrections. She approached them with patience, testing different ideas, observing the effects, and refining her approach. Each decision was deliberate. Each adjustment was thoughtful. She did not rush, knowing that the final impact depended on every small detail. The work was more than a task now. It was a creation that reflected her skill, care, and dedication. She felt a quiet pride in her persistence and her commitment to excellence. Her coworkers noticed that she was still working while they had finished hours ago. Some glanced over with curiosity, wondering why she had not completed the task. Others whispered to each other, unsure of what she was doing differently. They'd expected an ordinary result, but she had created something extraordinary. She did not concern herself with their observations. She'd always believed that true mastery was not about impressing others, but about the quiet satisfaction of doing something fully, thoughtfully, and well. Her focus remained on the work, on the final details that would make it complete. Hours passed. She continued refining the work. She tested subtle variations, corrected minor flaws, and enhanced details that were almost invisible but essential for the overall harmony. Each small adjustment contributed to the transformation of the task into a meaningful and elegant creation. She felt a sense of calm excitement as she observed the work taking its final form. The ordinary had become extraordinary, the simple had become complex, and the expected had become remarkable. Packing her tools, she felt a sense of accomplishment and anticipation. The work was far from finished, but it was evolving beautifully. She thought about the next steps, the adjustments to make, and the opportunities to further enhance the composition. The journey was ongoing, and she was fully committed to seeing it through. Each day, each challenge, and each discovery was part of the process that would transform the task from ordinary to extraordinary. Walking home, she reflected on the lessons of the day. She thought about how easily people underestimate what seems simple, how rushing leads to mediocrity, and how patience and attention reveal true potential. She felt a quiet pride in her approach, knowing that her dedication and focus were shaping something meaningful. The masterpiece was emerging, layer by layer, shaped by her care, persistence, and understanding. She was ready for the next day, eager to continue, and determined to see the journey through to its fullest expression. That night, she prepared for sleep. She reviewed the day in her mind. She thought about the challenges she had faced, the adjustments she had made, and the insights she had gained. Each step, each correction, and each experiment had brought her closer to the goal. She felt a sense of calm and anticipation, knowing that her dedication would continue to bear fruit. The task that others had considered easy had revealed its hidden complexity, and she had embraced it fully. She was ready for tomorrow, ready to continue, ready to see the masterpiece take shape. The next day, she arrived at the studio early as always, feeling a quiet excitement. Each day, the task she had been given revealed more of its depth, and she approached it with patience and determination. She set her tools carefully in their designated places, her hands moving with a practiced rhythm. The room was alive with casual chatter, laughter, and the sound of hurried work, but she didn't notice. Her focus was entirely on the work before her, on the challenge of turning something ordinary into something meaningful. The task that everyone else had dismissed as simple was, for her, a canvas full of possibilities. Waiting to be explored with care and attention, she reviewed her progress from the previous days. The work had grown, taken shape, and started to display subtle patterns that hinted at its potential. She traced over lines, checking for consistency, balance, and flow. Each detail mattered. She could see how small corrections and thoughtful adjustments had already transformed the work. It was no longer merely functional. It had a rhythm, a coherence, and an elegance that had been absent before. She felt a quiet sense of satisfaction, knowing that her careful approach was beginning to show results. As she worked, new challenges emerged. A section that had seemed complete the day before revealed subtle flaws that required correction. Proportions were slightly off, alignment needed adjustment, and minor inconsistencies threatened the overall harmony. She did not panic. Instead, she welcomed these challenges. Each obstacle was an opportunity to refine, improve, and enhance the work. She carefully adjusted, tested ideas, and noted observations in her notebook. Each step brought her closer to the ideal, and she approached every difficulty with patience, creativity, and determination. Her co-workers were moving quickly around her, finishing their tasks and talking about the simplicity of the work. Some glanced at her occasionally, curiosity mixed with confusion in their expressions. They assumed she was struggling or being overly meticulous, but she was neither. She was immersed in the process, exploring the hidden potential, refining every element, and learning with each adjustment. She knew that mastery was not about speed, but about intention, attention, and dedication. Her work would speak for itself when it was finished. Hours passed, and the studio grew quieter as more people left for the day. She remained absorbed in her task, observing, adjusting, and experimenting. She tried variations, small improvements, and subtle enhancements that could elevate the work. Some experiments failed, but she noted each result carefully. Failure was not discouragement, but a teacher, guiding her toward better understanding and improved results. Each challenge she overcame strengthened her skill, deepened her insight, and enhanced the overall composition. At one point, she encountered a particularly tricky section. The instructions were vague, and the structure seemed resistant to her adjustments. She studied it carefully, trying different approaches and analyzing the effects. Several attempts did not succeed, but she persisted. She understood that perseverance, creativity, and observation were essential to overcoming such obstacles. Each trial, whether successful or not, taught her something valuable. She made small corrections, tested new ideas, and noted observations, slowly uncovering the best solution. The work was beginning to reveal layers that no one had seen before, and she felt a quiet excitement at the possibilities as the afternoon sun streamed through the windows. She paused to assess her progress. The task that had seemed so easy to others had transformed into something complex and meaningful. Patterns were emerging, details were refined, and the composition was taking on a life of its own. She felt a quiet pride, not from the anticipation of praise, but from the satisfaction of knowing she had approached the work fully, thoughtfully, and with care. Every line, every adjustment, every improvement contributed to the emerging masterpiece. Her coworkers began to notice subtle differences. A few lingered near her workspace, whispering among themselves. They had expected a simple, ordinary result, but were beginning to sense that something different was happening. They could see her dedication, her careful adjustments, and the deliberate nature of her work. Some were curious, others puzzled. They still did not fully understand her process, but they could sense that the final result would be unlike anything they had anticipated. She did not seek their recognition. She simply continued, confident that her work would reveal its true value in time. Later, she faced another unexpected challenge. A section that had seemed straightforward revealed inconsistencies that required careful correction. She could have ignored them, as many might have, but she chose not to. She meticulously analyzed the section, experimenting with adjustments and testing ideas. Some attempts failed, but she learned from each one. Each correction, each refinement, and each improvement brought her closer to the final vision she had in mind. The task was no longer simple, but it was rewarding. Every challenge was an opportunity to create something remarkable. The quiet focus of the studio allowed her to work uninterrupted. She observed subtle details, corrected minor flaws, and enhanced the overall balance. Every line, shape, and proportion was carefully considered. She experimented with small variations, tested new ideas, and refined her work. Each improvement added depth and elegance, gradually transforming the task into something meaningful and compelling. The ordinary task that had been dismissed by others was evolving into a masterpiece, shaped by her patience, insight, and care. By late afternoon, the work had reached a stage where its true potential was beginning to show. The composition was balanced, the details refined, and the overall effect compelling. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that her dedication was starting to pay off. The task that had seemed simple to others was now a thoughtful creation, shaped by her patience, skill, and attention to detail. She understood that mastery was not about speed or convenience, but about persistence, its observation, and care. She took a short break, reflecting on the journey so far. She thought about the lessons she had learned, that patience and focus were more important than speed, that challenges were opportunities for growth, and that true understanding came from careful observation. She felt a quiet pride in her approach, knowing that the results would speak for themselves. She also recognized that the work was still far from complete. There were more layers to explore, more adjustments to make, and more opportunities to elevate the task into something extraordinary. When she resumed working, she approached the remaining sections with renewed determination. Each decision was deliberate, each correction intentional, and each enhancement thoughtful. She experimented with ideas that could add subtle improvements, tested variations, and noted observations. Even small changes had a significant impact, and she was attentive to every detail. Her notebook was filling rapidly, a record of discoveries, adjustments, and insights. She knew that this careful documentation would guide her as she continued, ensuring that nothing was overlooked and every opportunity was maximized. As evening approached, she looked at the work with a sense of quiet satisfaction. The transformation was clear. What had started as a simple task was evolving into a creation with depth, elegance, and meaning. The patience, focus, and care she had invested were visible in the subtle improvements, the thoughtful details, and the overall harmony. She knew that the final result would surprise those who had underestimated the task. But her satisfaction came not from proving them wrong, but from the fulfillment of having approached the work fully, intentionally, and with heart. That night, before going to sleep, She reviewed her thoughts and plans for the next day. She thought about the mistakes she had corrected, the adjustments she had made, and the ideas she wanted to test. Each step was part of a larger journey, one that would eventually transform a simple task into a masterpiece. She felt a sense of excitement and anticipation, knowing that her commitment, patience, and care would pay off. The journey was far from over, but she was prepared, determined, and fully engaged. She had learned the quiet truth that what seems easy to others can hold hidden depth, and that the difference between ordinary and extraordinary work lies in the heart and attention of the person doing it. The following morning, she returned to the studio with the same quiet determination. But today, there was a spark of confidence in her step. The progress she had made in the previous days had given her a sense of direction. She was not only aware of the challenges, but also of the possibilities. The task that everyone had dismissed as easy was beginning to show its hidden depth, and she was ready to explore it fully. As she entered the room, she noticed the usual chatter and movement of her coworkers. They were busy finishing their work quickly, still laughing and joking about how simple everything was. She gave them a small nod and moved to her corner, setting her tools with the same careful attention as always. She had learned to immerse herself in the work completely, blocking out distractions, and today would be no different. She started by reviewing her progress from the previous days. Every line, every adjustment, every note she had recorded in her notebook was carefully considered. She traced over the work with her eyes, checking for consistency, balance, and flow. She noticed subtle areas that needed improvement, details that had been missed, and opportunities for enhancement. To others, it might have seemed excessive, unnecessary even, but she understood that greatness was hidden in the details. Each small change, each minor correction, had the power to elevate the work from ordinary to exceptional. As she began working, new challenges emerged. Some parts resisted the improvements she wanted to make. Measurements seemed off, lines didn't align perfectly, and the overall balance was delicate. At first, she felt a twinge of frustration. She paused, took a deep breath, and reminded herself that this was part of the process. She had learned that patience and persistence were essential. Frustration was temporary, but the satisfaction of solving a problem and achieving precision would last. She carefully made adjustments, testing each idea before moving on to the next, treating every detail with the attention it deserved. Hours passed, and the quiet concentration in the studio became almost tangible. While others were rushing, finishing their work quickly, she was immersed in a rhythm of observation and adjustment. Every time she made a small correction, she felt a sense of accomplishment. Every time a new idea worked, a subtle excitement grew within her. She was discovering layers and connections that others had never considered. What was supposed to be a simple task was revealing itself as a complex puzzle, full of possibilities waiting to be uncovered. Her coworkers occasionally glanced at her, curiosity and confusion evident on their faces. They could see that she was taking more time than anyone else and assumed that she must be struggling. But they didn't understand. She was not struggling. She was learning, experimenting, and creating. Each movement, each decision, was purposeful. She was exploring the potential of the work, uncovering what others could not see. The contrast between her methodical approach and the hurried actions of those around her was clear, but she did not let it affect her. She knew the value of dedication and focus. She trusted the process she had chosen. Around mid-morning, she encountered a particularly difficult section. The instructions were vague, the structure complex, and the possibilities endless. She could have ignored it, completed it hastily like others might. But she didn't. She spent hours analyzing it, trying different approaches, sketching and noting observations in her notebook. She tested ideas, some of which failed, but even failures were valuable lessons. She learned something new each time, adjusting her approach and refining her understanding. This part of the work demanded creativity, patience, and problem-solving skills. And she embraced the challenge fully. The more she worked, the more she realized how much others had underestimated the task. They had rushed through it, focusing on speed rather than quality, and it produced results that were functional but unremarkable. She, however, was creating something that had depth, meaning, and potential. Every decision she made was intentional. Every line, every adjustment, every subtle enhancement contributed to the overall impact. She felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that her work would eventually reveal its true value. Even if no one else understood it yet, as the afternoon sun streamed through the windows, she paused to look at her progress. The task that had seemed so simple was transforming before her eyes. Details that had been overlooked were now highlighted. Balance and proportion were improving, and the overall composition was beginning to take shape in a way that was elegant and thoughtful. She felt a sense of quiet pride, not from external recognition, but from the satisfaction of knowing that she had approached the work with care, patience, and dedication. The masterpiece was emerging slowly, quietly, and beautifully. Her coworkers' curiosity grew. Some of them came closer, whispering to each other about how she was still working while they had finished hours ago. They were beginning to sense that something different was happening, though they still didn't fully understand. They assumed she was struggling or being overly meticulous, but she didn't mind. She knew that the difference between ordinary and extraordinary work was often invisible at first, only becoming apparent when the final result was revealed. She worked steadily, letting her actions speak for themselves, confident that the effort would be visible in the finished piece. Later, she faced another unexpected difficulty. A section that had seemed straightforward was not fitting with the overall structure. She had to rethink her approach, consider new angles, and experiment with alternatives. Each trial required careful observation and adjustment. She felt a small wave of doubt, but quickly pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. She knew that perseverance, creativity, and patience were the keys to overcoming obstacles. The challenge was not discouraging. It was invigorating. Each problem solved brought her closer to her goal and strengthened her understanding of the work. The studio grew quieter as the day progressed. Many coworkers had left, satisfied with their quick completions. She remained fully immersed in the work. The quiet allowed her to focus even more deeply, to notice subtleties and refine details. Each adjustment added depth, each correction improved harmony, and each new idea enhanced the composition. She felt a connection to the work that went beyond simple task completion. It was becoming a reflection of her attention, her care, and her determination to do something meaningful. By late afternoon, the work had reached a point where its true potential was beginning to show. The composition was balanced, the details refined, and the overall effect compelling. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that her dedication was starting to pay off. The task that had seemed simple to others was now a complex, thoughtful creation, shaped by her patience, skill, and attention to detail. She understood that mastery was not about speed or convenience, but about persistence, observation, and care. She took a short break, reflecting on the journey so far. She thought about the lessons she had learned, that patience and focus were more important than speed, that challenges were opportunities for growth, and that true understanding came from careful observation. She felt a quiet pride in her approach, knowing that the results would speak for themselves. She also recognized that the work was still far from complete. There were more layers to explore, more adjustments to make, and more opportunities to elevate the task into something extraordinary. When she resumed working, she approached the remaining sections with renewed determination. Each decision was deliberate, each correction intentional, and each enhancement thoughtful. She experimented with ideas that could add subtle improvements, tested variations, and noted observations. Even small changes had a significant impact, and she was attentive to every detail. Her notebook was filling rapidly, a record of discoveries, adjustments, and insights. She knew that this careful documentation would guide her as she continued, ensuring that nothing was overlooked and every opportunity was maximized. As evening approached, she looked at the work with a sense of quiet satisfaction. The transformation was clear. What had started as a simple task was evolving into a creation with depth, elegance, and meaning. The patience, focus, and care she had invested were visible in the subtle improvements, the thoughtful details, and the overall harmony. She knew that the final result would surprise those who had underestimated the task. But her satisfaction came not from proving them wrong, but from the fulfillment of having approached the work fully, intentionally, and with heart. That night, as she prepared for bed, she reviewed the day in her mind. Every challenge she had faced, every detail she had noticed, and every decision she had made seemed important now. She felt a sense of calm and anticipation. The task that others had considered easy had revealed itself to be a canvas for creativity and skill. She knew the journey was just beginning, but she was ready. She had embraced the challenge. She had discovered the quiet joy that comes from working with care, thoughtfulness, and dedication. Tomorrow, she would continue, and the masterpiece would continue to grow. Shaped by her hands, her mind, and her heart. The next morning, she returned to the studio with renewed energy. Her mind was still filled with ideas from the day before, and she felt a quiet excitement about continuing. The task she had been given seemed simple on the surface, but she knew that every detail mattered. As she entered the studio, she noticed the casual chatter of her coworkers. They were moving quickly, laughing, and congratulating themselves for finishing their parts the day before. None of them paid much attention to her, and she didn't mind. She had never been concerned with the opinions of others. Her focus was always on understanding, on observing, and on creating something meaningful. She set her bag down and began to arrange her workspace, as she always did. Every pencil, paper, and tool had a place, and she liked to start each day with everything in order. She found that a clean and organized space made it easier to think clearly and work efficiently. As she looked around, she noticed how few people really cared about the details. They were satisfied with surface-level results and quick completions, but she knew that real work required more. She took a deep breath and reminded herself to be patient, to take her time, and to pay attention to everything, no matter how small. She picked up the work from where she had left off and studied it carefully. There were small mistakes she had made the day before that needed correcting, and new ideas that had come to mind during the night. She began by making subtle adjustments, refining lines, and improving structure. It was slow work, but she enjoyed it. Each small improvement felt significant, like uncovering a hidden layer of meaning. The task, which had seemed simple to everyone else, was revealing itself as a complex puzzle, one that required thought, creativity, and skill around her. Coworkers were moving quickly from one task to another. Some of them glanced at her occasionally, curiosity mixed with confusion on their faces. They couldn't understand why she was taking so long on something so easy. One of them even asked why she hadn't finished yet, expecting her to respond with a quick answer. She smiled politely but didn't explain. Words weren't necessary. She knew that actions spoke louder than explanations. She let her work do the talking, confident that the results would eventually show the difference between rushing and truly caring about the outcome. As she worked, new challenges appeared. Some parts were trickier than she had imagined, requiring her to rethink her approach. Small errors in measurements, unexpected inconsistencies, and gaps in the original instructions forced her to adapt. She didn't panic or complain. Instead, she welcomed these obstacles as opportunities to learn and improve. Each problem she encountered was a chance to test her patience, sharpen her skills, and deepen her understanding. She knew that overcoming difficulties was part of what made ordinary work extraordinary. Hours passed without her noticing. Her mind was completely absorbed in the task, analyzing, adjusting, and experimenting. She made small changes, tested new ideas, and observed how each adjustment affected the overall result. Some experiments worked beautifully, enhancing the work in ways she had not expected. Others failed, but even failures were valuable. She carefully noted every observation in her notebook, creating a record of her process that could guide her future decisions. It was methodical, deliberate, and deeply satisfying. She could hear occasional whispers from her coworkers. They were beginning to notice that her work was not like theirs. Something about it was different, though they couldn't quite put their finger on it. They assumed she must be struggling, but she wasn't. She was learning, growing, and shaping her work with intention. There was a quiet confidence in her movements, a steady rhythm that spoke of someone who understood that mastery came from persistence, focus, and the courage to pay attention to the smallest details. As the day went on, She faced moments of frustration. Certain parts of the task resisted her efforts, no matter how carefully she worked. Lines didn't align, ideas didn't fit, and minor errors seemed to multiply. At times, she felt a small wave of doubt. She questioned whether her approach was right and whether the extra effort would make a difference. But she did not let these doubts stop her. She took breaks when needed, stretched, and refocused. Each time she returned to the work, she approached it with fresh eyes and renewed determination. During one particularly challenging moment, she discovered a small mistake that had been overlooked from the start. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it affected the balance of the entire work. She could have ignored it, as many others would have, but she didn't. She carefully corrected it, adjusting surrounding elements to maintain harmony. The process was tedious, but it felt important. She realized that every choice she made, no matter how minor, contributed to the overall quality and impact. This was not just a task to complete. It was a creation she was shaping with care and intention. Her dedication began to show. Subtle changes in the perception of her coworkers. They started to watch more closely, whispering among themselves. Some were intrigued, others puzzled. They had expected quick results, something ordinary and functional. But what they were witnessing was deliberate, thoughtful, and meticulous. She didn't try to impress them, but she noticed the shift. People were beginning to understand, at least on some level, that there was more to this task than they had realized. The work had begun to speak for itself as afternoon turned into evening. She continued steadily, taking small breaks to reflect on her progress. She looked at her notebook, reviewing the notes, sketches, and observations she had recorded. Each entry represented a lesson, an insight, or an improvement. She felt a sense of pride, not because anyone would recognize it immediately, but because she had committed herself fully to the process. She had embraced the challenge, explored every detail, and pushed beyond what was expected. This was her own reward, the quiet satisfaction of doing something well, thoroughly and with integrity. The room grew quieter as the day progressed. Many coworkers finishing their work and leaving, she remained fully absorbed, adjusting lines, refining details, and testing ideas. The task was slowly taking shape in a way that was more complex and beautiful than anyone had anticipated. She felt a deep connection to it, a sense that her effort and attention were giving life to something that would endure. The ordinary task was transforming into something extraordinary. And she felt a quiet thrill at the thought. She thought about the lessons she was learning. What looked easy on the surface often contained hidden complexity. People underestimated it, rushed through it, and produced results that were adequate but uninspired. True mastery required patience, focus, and a willingness to explore fully. She knew that every small adjustment mattered. Every moment of attention contributed, and every challenge offered a chance to improve. It was a lesson she carried with her, not just in this task, but in every part of life. The ordinary could become extraordinary when approached with care, intention, and heart. By the time the studio was almost empty, she had reached a point where the work seemed to have its own rhythm and flow. The details were sharper, the composition more balanced, and the overall effect more compelling. She felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, knowing that her efforts were beginning to pay off. Yet she remained humble, understanding that there was still more to do. The journey was ongoing. She was committed to seeing it through with the same dedication and focus she had shown from the beginning. Packing her tools, she took one last look at the progress she had made. The room was quiet now, the sun setting outside, casting long shadows across the floor. She felt a sense of calm and satisfaction. The day had been challenging, filled with moments of doubt, frustration, and discovery. But she had remained steady, working carefully, observing closely, and learning continuously. The task was far from finished, but it was evolving into something meaningful and impressive. She knew that each day she devoted to it would add layers, depth, and nuance that would eventually reveal the full impact of her work. Walking home, she reflected on the experience. The laughter, casual conversation, and rushed work of others seemed distant. She thought about the lessons she had learned and the satisfaction of seeing slow, careful progress. The task that others had dismissed as easy had revealed itself to be a challenge that required focus, patience, and skill. She felt a quiet pride in her approach, knowing that the process itself was as important as the result. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and discoveries, and she was ready to face them with the same dedication. She arrived at the small studio early in the morning, her bag slung over her shoulder, and a quiet determination in her eyes. The room was already buzzing with activity, although most people didn't even notice her as she moved to a corner to set up her tools. The task had been handed to her only the day before, and while everyone else in the office laughed it off, calling it simple and straightforward, she could feel an unusual excitement building inside her. To the others, it seemed like something anyone could complete in a few hours. But she knew better. She had learned long ago that even the easiest-looking tasks had hidden depths, and that the difference between ordinary and extraordinary work was patience, attention, and a willingness to push past what everyone else thought was enough. The first thing she did was study the assignment carefully. She didn't rush, even though people around her were already joking about how fast they could get it done. She opened the folder, looked at the pages, and traced her fingers over the lines of instructions, as if she could feel the story within them. She had seen many people take tasks like this lightly, completing them without much thought, leaving them functional but lifeless. She didn't want to be like that. She wanted to understand every little detail, to know exactly what was required, and what possibilities lay beyond what anyone had imagined. Her mind wandered briefly to the reactions she had already received. A few coworkers had smiled patronizingly, telling her she would have it finished by lunch and that she shouldn't worry too much. Their words were meant to encourage, but she knew it was different. They didn't understand that some tasks had invisible layers. What looked easy was often a challenge waiting to reveal itself. She smiled faintly at the memory, not out of arrogance, but out of understanding. She knew that rushing through it would never result in anything remarkable. She was willing to spend hours, days if necessary, to do it right. She began by organizing her workspace. Everything had its place: pencils, brushes, papers, and a small notebook for sketches and notes. People often overlooked how much the environment affected the work, but she had learned that order created clarity. As she arranged her tools, she noticed the laughter and chatter around her. People tapping on keyboards, shuffling papers, and offering each other tips that were often more about impressing others than actually helping. She listened to them politely, but she did not let it distract her. Her focus was on the blank page before her and the endless possibilities it contained. As she started, she realized the first step was trickier than anyone had anticipated. The instructions seemed simple, but as she tried to put them into practice, small challenges emerged. The proportions were off, the alignment slightly skewed, and certain details were more complicated than they appeared. She sighed quietly, not out of frustration, but in recognition of the work ahead. This was exactly why she had to be careful. Everyone else would have brushed these issues aside, claiming the work was done. She, however, would address every imperfection. Each small mistake was an opportunity to learn, to make something better, to turn the ordinary into something extraordinary. Hours passed and she barely noticed. Her focus was unbroken. She studied each element carefully, making small adjustments and noting them in her notebook. There were moments when her hand trembled slightly, when she realized she had overlooked a minor detail, but she corrected it immediately, learning from it rather than letting it discourage her. The room around her continued in its casual chaos, but she remained in her own quiet world, where precision and creativity met. She felt a strange kind of joy in the challenge, a sense that she was uncovering something hidden beneath the surface of what others considered easy. Occasionally, someone would peek over her shoulder, curious about what she was doing. They expected to see quick results, something that looked finished in minutes. Instead, they saw careful measurements, repeated sketches, small corrections, and thoughtful pauses. Some of them frowned slightly, unable to understand why she was taking so long. They didn't see the care in her movements or the depth of her thought, but she didn't mind. She was not working for approval. She was working for the satisfaction of truly understanding and mastering the task. By mid-afternoon, she had already identified patterns and connections that others had missed. Simple elements that had been overlooked now seemed to have their own stories. She started experimenting with small changes, testing ideas that could enhance the final outcome. Each experiment taught her something new. Some worked beautifully, others failed, but she noted them all. Her notebook was filling with sketches, notes, and observations, a record of a journey that was invisible to everyone else. The work was no longer just a task. It had become a personal challenge, a puzzle she was determined to solve. The laughter and chatter around her had grown louder, as people began finishing their parts quickly and moving on to other things. They congratulated each other for being efficient, but efficiency was not her goal. She wanted depth, meaning, and impact. She wanted the final result to be more than functional. She wanted it to be something that spoke for itself, something that would surprise even those who had dismissed it as easy. The thought made her smile faintly. It was not about proving anyone wrong, but about honoring her own standards and the potential of the work. As the afternoon sun streamed through the windows, she paused for a moment to look at her progress. It was still far from complete, but already she could see the transformation taking shape. Details were sharper, lines were cleaner, and the composition had a rhythm that others had missed. She felt a quiet pride, not from the recognition of others, but from the growing realization that she was creating something special. Each small decision had contributed to this. The journey itself was as rewarding as the end result would be. She noticed a few coworkers glancing at her again, whispering to each other. Their curiosity had shifted from mild amusement to genuine intrigue. They had expected something simple and quick, but now they were witnessing someone who approached a seemingly easy task with care, thought, and passion. The contrast was noticeable, though she did not concern herself with it. She was focused on the work, and the reactions around her were secondary. What mattered was the process, the careful attention to detail, and the joy of seeing something ordinary begin to take on extraordinary qualities. The hours continued, blending into each other. She moved steadily, never rushing, never hesitating when a small challenge appeared. Each mistake was corrected, each detail examined, and each new idea tested. By late afternoon, she had reached a point where the work began to feel alive. The lines, shapes, and forms were no longer just functional. They seemed to have purpose and energy. It was subtle, something that only someone paying attention would notice, but she could feel it. This was the reward for patience, for dedication, and for the willingness to look beyond what others considered enough, even as she worked. She thought about the lesson in all of this. People often underestimate what seems easy. They rush, assume, and cut corners. But she had learned that mastery comes not from speed or simplicity, but from attention, care, and the courage to explore fully. She smiled to herself, knowing that the final result would carry this truth silently. It would speak for itself, and those who had doubted or dismissed it would eventually see the depth and effort behind it. But that was not her motivation. She worked because she loved the process, because she believed in doing something fully, honestly, and beautifully. By the time the office began to empty for the day, she had made significant progress, though there was still work ahead. She packed her tools carefully, leaving the space tidy and organized. She took one last look at what she had accomplished so far, feeling a quiet satisfaction. The task was far from finished, but the foundation was strong. She knew the next day would bring new challenges, and she welcomed them. The journey of transforming a simple assignment into a masterpiece was just beginning, and she was ready to continue. She left the studio with a sense of purpose. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows, and the air was filled with the gentle hum of the city winding down. She walked slowly, thinking about the progress she had made and the possibilities ahead. The people around her had finished their work quickly and were moving on, but she carried the work in her mind, considering every detail, every choice, and every small improvement she could make. She understood that true mastery required more than talent or intelligence. It required patience, persistence, and the willingness to see what others could not.